Okay, well, there's so much news going on. We don't want to miss any of the other things that have been happening this week, and that's why we're joined now by Peter Schweitzer, president of the Government Accountability Institute and author of Red-Handed: How American Elites Got Rich Helping China Win. Peter, thanks for joining me today. And there's a really disturbing story I heard about this week coming out of Michigan, where two Chinese students are being investigated for bringing in a toxic fungus to the United States. Now, according to reports, the FBI said authorities also found, along with the fungus, a scientific article on one of the two's phones titled "Plant Pathogen Warfare Under Changing Climate Conditions." The charge has been laid against two of these students for conspiracy, smuggling, false statements, and visa fraud. But this, Peter, is a really shocking story with some really terrifying implications. Tell us about it.
Yeah, it is. I mean, China operates under something called disintegration warfare, and it's basically we are going to be at war with the West, Australia, the United States, and Europe. We're going to do it short of kinetic warfare because we don't want a shooting war, but we're going to use things like fentanyl, for example, or plant pathogens to make life very difficult for these countries. And this seems to be another example of that type of warfare. And I think it speaks to the larger problem, this debate we're having in the United States about the role of Chinese students. I mean, look, I think we all would love to have students come from around the world, learn, help the United States learn more on scientific issues. The problem is when you look at so many of the issues taking place, it involves Chinese students. Look at the issue of fentanyl. I mean, the Drug Enforcement Agency has been saying it for years. The money laundering that takes place by the drug cartels in the United States oftentimes is done by Chinese students who are in the United States on student visas. They bring suitcases of cash to Chinese state-owned banks in the United States to launder the money. You have this issue of pathogens. You certainly have the issue of technology being stolen. So it is a major problem. These are not students as we traditionally think about it in the context of the Western world.
And Peter, it's been revealed, just speaking about students, and particularly Harvard, which is, of course, ground zero for so much of the Trump administration's efforts to fight against this phenomenon. It's been revealed that Harvard's 2025 commencement speaker, Luana Yarong-Jiang, apparently worked for a Chinese Communist Party entity with extensive ties to Beijing's military and intelligence networks. Here's a little bit of what she spoke about.
That promise of a connected world is giving way to division, fear, and conflict. We're starting to believe those who think differently, vote differently, or pray differently, whether they are across the ocean or sitting right next to us, are not just wrong. We mistakenly see them as evil.
I mean, Peter, this strikes me here listening to her that really what's fascinating is you've got this person who has got ties to the Chinese Communist Party using woke speak to essentially, basically push their agenda. Tell us about this.
Yeah, it's a classic example of Chinese propaganda. I mean, they talk about issues like human rights. They talk about diversity. They talk about racial intolerance. If you want to look at the major problem in all of those areas, it's in China under the CCP. And yet they come here and lecture us about problems that, yes, we do have sometimes in these areas. The thing to keep in mind is with her, but also with a lot of the students that are going to Harvard, these are not, 19, 21-year-old kids that are coming to Harvard fresh out of college, sort of with wide eyes looking at the world. These are oftentimes middle ranking bureaucrats in their late 20s that are going to the Kennedy School at Harvard. They're going to get their MBA at Harvard. Maybe they're coming to study the hard sciences. These are people that are already part of the CCP party and government apparatus. So we need to stop engaging in mirror imaging. That is, thinking that when China is sending students, it's just as if Australia or the United States is sending students. It's not. It's part of a sophisticated effort that they have to undermine the United States, to gather intelligence, and to perpetuate the interests of the CCP. So when they talk about issues like racial justice, the question that needs to be asked of them is, How is China doing in that? How are the Uyghurs doing? How is Tibet doing? How are racial minorities in China doing? The answer is not good at all. So they're completely disingenuous when they talk about these things.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And, you know, this also leads to other issues. It's not just the schools, of course, in the United States. There's also issues about land and assets and, you know, particularly land and farmland near American military installations. Big controversy this week in Arizona, where the governor, Katie Hobbs, she's under fire for vetoing a bill that would have banned the Chinese government from owning a stake of 30% or more of any property in the state. Now, Hobbs argued that the bill lacks implementation criteria and opens the door to arbitrary enforcement. But you know, when you think about this in the context of the Chinese Communist Party's war to undermine the West, which it sees as a rival and has a long history of doing this sort of thing, it would seem that this would make strategic sense. Here in Australia, we have a fight to get our port of Darwin back, which is a critical port. It seems that this would be a no-brainer in the U.S.
Yeah, it should be a no-brainer. Certainly Arizona's that's the case. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom vetoed a bill. The bill in California, it was passed by Democrats and Republicans with strong majorities in the state legislature. That bill simply said the Chinese government cannot buy land, and Gavin Newsom didn't want to prevent that from happening either. All I would contend to people who say, oh, this is much ado about nothing, is look at what just happened, what Ukraine just did with Russia. And I say good job, rightfully so. They were able to smuggle in drones, launch those drones with military precision, and take out major aircraft at Russian military bases. If you own farmland, if you own vacant lots near military installations, there is no reason, God forbid, if there was a major conflict between China and the United States, that China could not execute the exact same type of operation. So this is not fantasizing. This is not conspiracy theory. This is looking at the realities of warfare today. Warfare is no longer about guys in the trenches shooting at each other. It's far more mobile than that, and drone technology and other advanced technologies would allow China to use these strategic locations near U.S. military installations to launch military strikes. Ukraine did it. Certainly China could do it against the United States if they needed to.
Peter, I'm so glad you mentioned Ukraine, because that was exactly my thought when I heard those reports out of Russia, and I thought it won't always be the good guys who are manning those drones. Peter Schweitzer, thank you so much for joining me on the U.S. Report.